of atheism in Florida. Don't forget the Atheists of Florida website at talkaof.ngo. And don't forget that you can call in any time and insult an atheist for only $2. You know, atheists are one of the few people that it's safe to insult anymore without having to worry about some sort of backlash. So take advantage of that, and it's a half-price offer. $2 only to insult an atheist. Now, for tonight's business. Our guest in the studio tonight is Gary Gibbons of Tampa. Mr. Gibbons is presently serving as president of the law firm Gibbons, Newman, and is a board member and legal advisor to Community Stepping Stones, Inc., a 501c3 not-for-profit organization whose mission involves teaching science, math, and life skills to at-risk youth through an arts-based curriculum. He also serves on the development committee of WMNF 88.5 FM Community Radio and is active with the Sierra Club. And also in the studio are the usual suspects, Judy Atkins, Jim Peterson, and me.
Hello.
I am Joe Reinhardt.
Very good.
Thank you so much, it's nice to remember who I am. I know it cost my parents plenty. Now, our topic generally this evening is the Constitution Revision Committee. Now, their Constitution Revision Committee is a group of 37 people who will review and recommend changes to Florida's Constitution, which provides for the commission in Article 11, Section 2. The CRC approved 8 revisions to be placed on the 2018 general election value for voter consideration, and we'll start out by talking about those. I'm going to throw it over now to Mr. Gibbons. Gary, tell us about the Constitutional Revision Commission and the damage and good they may be doing all of us soon.
Well, you know, the thing that Florida, first of all, it has more ways to amend the Constitution than any other state in the country, which we have tried to do many times since 1968 when we have our current Constitution. We've had more than 150 amendments proposed. And unfortunately, a lot of them pass. I don't know what it is about people seeing things on a ballot, but they love to vote yes, when my usual approach is we shouldn't have things like this in the Constitution. A lot of the things that have been proposed this time are things that really belong as part of regular legislation passed by the legislature. But for whatever reason, they've decided that they want to do it differently. The CRC meets every 20 years, and I guess the idea was to try to come along and fix things that need to be tweaked in the Constitution by supposedly a nonpartisan group. But unfortunately, the way that it's been set up is the governor has 15 appointments, and the president of the Senate has 9, and the Speaker of the House has 9. Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, is an automatic member, and then the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court gets to appoint 3 people. So with the current makeup in Tallahassee, we have a very conservative group that has been appointed to this. And the other thing that we find is that there are many of these amendments that have more than one subject, which is troubling. If you and I were going to try to get an amendment on the ballot by collecting petitions, we would be required to have a single subject in that amendment. We would also have to have the wording approved by the Florida Supreme Court, and that's not a requirement for the CRC. So they have fashioned together 8 of these amendments, and most of them have 2 subjects in them. And so if you want one of the things, then you have to vote for the other one as well, even though you might not want to. So there have been a lot of articles written already. Tampa Bay Times and others that have been very critical of the multiple subjects in each one of these.
Has anyone ever suggested to the CRC, to the commission members, that they consider revising the nature of the CRC itself so as to ensure that it had a makeup that was more consistent with the political makeup of the state, which is considerably more diverse than the single-party representation of the commission?
Yeah, no.
Nobody thought of it, or nobody had the nerve?
Nobody wants to. Yeah, I attended the public hearing here at Hillsborough Community College about 6 months ago, and we signed up to speak. We had 3 minutes to speak, and they handed us red and green cards to hold up. They asked us not to applaud afterwards, but a lot of people got up with thoughtful things to put into the Constitution, and the panel was sitting up there, and for about the first 5 minutes they looked like they were interested in paying attention, and afterwards you could see them playing with their phones and not paying attention to what was going on. And my comment to them was, first of all, do no harm. Don't put things into the Florida Constitution that really don't belong there. Like we have the pigs in cages provision that was passed several years ago. Mm-hmm. Why that's in the Florida Constitution, I have no idea. But it is. And there's several things. Greyhound racing is another one that's up this time on the ballot.
And then next time it'll have to be horse racing.
Exactly.
I think perhaps we should start at the top of the list here and go down the 8 amendments and take them in their separate parts and weigh the good and the bad, at least our informed opinion on the good and the bad, which is the opinion that everyone else ought to hold.
Of course.
Well, the only one that I'm most concerned about, of course, is the one that involves education. But
Actually, there are 2 of them that
well,
have an educational content.
I don't think that made it onto the ballot.
Well, there are 8 that the CRC has proposed. There are also 2 that citizens have
Right.
asked to have put on the ballot.
Yes, and one of those I'm also concerned with. I should have corrected that.
And then there are 3 that the legislature has decided need to be on this year's ballot. So.
Well, shall we start with the citizen and then the legislature?
Yeah, I think so.
We'll start with the small numbers and work up.
Okay. So the first citizen initiative is this is Amendment 4, and it's for the automatic restoration of voting rights for convicted felons, with the exception of people who commit murder or convicted of a felony of a sexual nature. So otherwise, once you serve your sentence and you fulfill all the terms of that, including probation, you would have your voting rights restored. Florida is only one of 4 states in the country where this doesn't happen automatically. And so that one, really, when I was at the public hearing, many people got up to speak in favor of this because at that time it had not made it to the ballot, and they were hoping that the CRC would put it on there. But this is one that really is long past due.
Yes.
This is a
passage here.
no-brainer,
Yeah.
frankly.
Because it's so arbitrary now. It's up to the governor.
Right.
And the person has to appeal to the governor.
Right.
And
Well, it's
The
clearly
governor and cabinet, they're
yes.
all 4 of them, and I made the comment in my comments at that hearing that it shouldn't be up to the whim of 4 people
Right.
who might be having a bad day when you come up for
Exactly.
your turn to ask for your rights to be restored.
The whole restoration of rights fiasco in Florida just smacks of Jim Crow.
Yes.
We've been assured has gone away. Let's make sure that it stays away.
The next one that's been done by
So make sure you vote yes on 4.
yes on 4 definitely.
Write this down, folks.
The next citizen initiative is Amendment 2, and it's casino gambling is the subject matter. And if approved, it would make a citizen initiative and 60% statewide vote the only way Florida would ever be able to have casino gambling here. The legislature would not be able to pass a law to legalize gambling here, and some say that that would provide a monopoly for the Seminole Indian tribe, who is exempt from any of the legislation that we have. So somebody thought it important enough to require this to be something that people would vote on here. I'm not a big gambler, so I don't really have a feel for whether we want it here or not.
Anyone who has the a sufficiently stable moral background and has the capital to finance it ought to be allowed to open a casino or a poker room or whatever. It isn't as if anyone who wants to gamble has any difficulty finding something to gamble on. There are plenty of opportunities online. There are the state lottery, there are horse races, dog races, and so on and so forth. So,
Well, I agree with you, but does this need to be in the Constitution?
no.
Okay.
No, it ought not to be a
like so many
constitutional
other things.
amendment.
Right.
It ought to be available by the legislature, and gambling in areas big enough to support it ought to be so long as it's sustainable. And the key to having a successful gambling operation in your state is one where the gambling is supported not so much by the locals but by tourists, so that you have people bringing money into your state rather than the gambling vigorish taking money out of the local community. That's the kind of gambling we want, and lo and behold, Florida is a resort destination already, or so I'm told.
So could we back up just a moment, and could you give us a succinct definition of what the Constitution is supposed to do?
Well, the Florida Constitution is supposed to regulate how, first of all, it deals with, very similar to the federal Constitution, the various branches of government that we have and the operations of those things. And then some basic rights that we have here. And so there should be things that in there that deal with rights of citizens here, and not things that could otherwise be dealt with or might need to change over time through legislation. That's why you have a legislature. Unfortunately, the Florida legislature has ignored a lot of things that the public wants. Medical marijuana was one that comes to mind, that they tinkered with it and they didn't get it to where we could really take advantage of that as a health measure, and so the citizens had to gather the petitions to get that done. We had to pass an amendment to preserve more state land, and of course the legislature hasn't funded that.
Yeah, right.
So, it takes 766,200 signatures to get a citizen initiative on the ballot, and those signatures have to be gathered within 2 years. It used to be 4 years. So they continue to chip away at the public's ability to get things on, and that's why it was really impressive that the restoration of voting rights is on the ballot, and hope we get that one done.
Does the citizenry have any recourse when the legislature fails in its duty to administer the initiatives that the public, that the voters have already passed?
Yeah, that's really gets back to how the amendment is worded. And I know that they went out of their way on the medical marijuana one to make it almost self-effectuating, so that the legislature couldn't monkey with it anymore. So,
Well, that was their intent. So
yeah,
doesn't
Yeah,
have to
it
be
still hasn't
successful.
happened, but it's
Joe Redner and
Yeah.
Morgan are already in court,
Yeah.
Right.
which seems to be the only way to resolve the problem, and
Yeah.
that is, a bounty for litigation.
But let's move on to the ones that the legislature has proposed that'll be on the ballot this year. And Amendment 1 is going to propose an increase of the homestead tax exemption for properties worth more than $125,000. The homestead exemption would increase from $50,000 to $75,000. What this is going to do is it's really going to impact the budgets of cities and counties and school boards immensely, because that's right in the wheelhouse of the tax base, and they're really going to cut a lot of money out of the budgets. I think it's going to be devastating for fixing potholes and sewers and things of that nature. So,
As with any other political action, someone's interests are being served by this. Everybody, all the voters, of course, will look at it and say, "Oh, another $25,000 in tax exemption for me. It'll put money in my pocket." So it should probably pass easily. But the question is, who proposed it and how will they benefit?
yeah, the legislature proposed this one, and they love to give away other people's money and then give mandates to local government to do
Yes.
more with less. So
How
that's
does
really
that,
what's
how does
happening.
that differ from ordinary stealing?
Yeah, one has to ask.
Well, does this principally benefit real estate interests, or who are the beneficiaries, other than the voters who think, and the political party that makes these recommendations, who thinks they're going to get some extra bounce out of it?
Homeowners. That's really that's
Chamber of Commerce?
where it is. Yeah. The
They
realtors
don't-
probably like it.
People don't seem to realize that when you're not paying your taxes, you are in effect undermining the civilization that supports you. I mean, when you talk about police and fire protection, you talk about schools and cultural institutions and community infrastructure, all that is what is supported by this by the taxes collected under that are affected by homestead exemption. But people don't seem to be able to make that connection for some reason.
Right. I think what's going to happen if it passes is that the counties are going to have to raise the millage significantly to make up for the shortfall. So,
Or they'll go to those areas where it's really hard to point the finger at them, and the toll will go from $1 to $3, and the campsite will go from $5 a night to $15, and so on, so that they sort of sneak it in under the radar. I know one of the provisos in the recent past was extra tax exemption and homestead exemptions for veterans and survivors, etc. I'm not clear whether that ever passed or if that's in the.
I don't believe that one passed, but I'm not certain.
We're not interested in belief.
The next one that's up is Amendment 2, and this is, with homestead property, we have something since 1995 called the Save Our Homes Amendment that was passed back then that allows a maximum of 3% increase per year in your assessment of your home. There's no corresponding cap for non-homestead property. So for an office building or a rental house, they get a free look at you every year, and they could raise it to whatever they feel that the market value is. So a few years ago, they put a cap that sunsets this year of a maximum of 10% per year increase on non-homestead property assessments. So if property in your locality increased by 15% in a year, the tax property appraiser, tax collector could raise your taxes by that much. They want to make that a permanent 10% cap, and so that's what Amendment 2 tries to do for rental property and offices, restaurants, etc. That would make that a permanent thing. And the third one that the legislature is proposing is Amendment 5, And this would require a 2/3 vote of the legislature to increase any taxes or fees. Right now, it's just a simple majority, and they want to make it a supermajority of 2/3 vote. They've tried to do this in other places, and I think it's been disastrous in the states where it's happened because, for example, let's say that we had another hurricane and some significant damage, and we needed to raise some money to fix things. You have to go back and get a 2/3 vote of the legislature with the group that's up there that,
It's impossible to get a 50%
exactly.
vote.
So
2/3.
this one scares me a lot. I don't think we need to etch this in stone in the Florida Constitution. This needs to be something that we have a little more flexibility about. So those are the ones that have been put up by the citizens and the legislature, and now we turn to the CRC. And the first one, now we're going to get to the ones that have the double requirements in them. So if you like column A, you have to pick column B as well. Victims' rights and judicial retirement age. I'm not sure what those things have in common, but this would. There was a California law that tried to give victims of crimes more input in the judicial process, notifications of court dates, input on sentencing recommendations, things of that nature. And so that's what they're proposing on this one. It would establish a series of rights for crime victims, including the right to be notified of major developments in the criminal case, right to be heard in legal proceedings. It would increase, but at the same time, it would increase the mandatory retirement age for judges from 70 to 75. And then the last thing, which is kind of a sleeper to me, that they snuck in there, would provide that judges or hearing officers should not necessarily defer to the interpretation of laws and rules by governmental agencies in legal proceedings. The Florida legislature will pass a law, and then they will delegate rulemaking authority to an agency of the state that employs people that have expertise in that area. And what they're saying by this amendment is, if you go to court to interpret this, we're not going to really pay any attention to what those experts have said. We're going to let the judge decide it on himself without giving any weight to that. So, again, I don't think this belongs in the Florida Constitution. And, if they want to raise the retirement ages of judges, let's do that as a standalone. And they can certainly pass a law that gives victims rights like this. That's the way it was done in California.
So your suggestion is to vote no on?
I'm going to vote no on a lot of these that, probably all of them, especially the ones that have more than one subject, even though I like the ban against offshore drilling. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it really is going to amount to much anyway.
But the important thing so far is to remember to vote yes on number 4.
That's correct.
That's the restoration of voting rights. So we've got about 10 seconds here. We're going to take a little break, a minute or two, and talk about Atheists of Florida, a subject that I'm sure everyone is dying to hear more about. And we'll be right back in about a minute or two.
So the next one is the education.
Yeah. I've got the list up here, too. So.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com.
And we're back with the Atheist Forum with our esteemed guest, Mr. Gary Gibbons. We have on my right Judy Atkins and Jim Peterson. And Jim has for us our weekly quote of the week. That's why we call it the quote of the week. Jim, what do you got for us?
Our quote today is from a steaming H.L. Mencken.
All right.
And one of the things that he once said is that, quote, "On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be adorned by a downright moron. If after I depart this vale you ever remember me, and have thought to please my ghost, forgive some sinner, and wink your eye at some homely girl. The urge to save humanity is almost always only a false face for the urge to rule it." This is a lot of different ideas from one quote. Love is the triumph of imagination
I think
over
they
intelligence.
may be different quotes.
I mean, I think they may be,
But
yes.
they're all pretty
So
good.
actually, you're getting a bargain here. You're
Yeah.
getting all these really extraordinary.
I
Love
won't
is
have
the
to think for
triumph of
myself for
imagination
several
over
minutes. This will be
intelligence.
great.
Yes.
Yeah.
And well, just one more, the last one. The average man does not want to be free. He simply wants to be safe. And that may have something to do with the object of our discussion today.
Could very well be. Excuse me. All right. Let's get back to Gary Gibbons. And to remind you, Gary is a local attorney. He is active in community affairs with Stepping Stones, Inc., which is a mission teaching. Their mission is teaching science, math, and life skills to at-risk youth through an arts-based curriculum. And for those of you who have been in Florida more than a week or two, Gary is very closely related to a gentleman by the name of Sam Gibbons, who's served about 34 years in the U.S. legislature as a congressman for our district. Also, if you'd like to call in and talk to us, our number, 727-441-3000 is our local number, 441-3000. You can call in toll-free, 866-826-1340. Gary, what's next in the list of proposed constitutional amendments?
Well, the next one is Amendment 7, and it deals with two subjects again. Compensating first responder families or for people that are killed in the line of duty, and then also education spending and raising fees for colleges and community colleges. Again, two things that are just on complete opposite ends of the spectrum are all together in this one amendment. But Amendment 7 would require the payment of death benefits when law enforcement officers, paramedics, correctional officers, or other first responders are killed while performing official duties. It would also apply to the National Guard and active duty military members stationed in Florida. That's the first part. The second part would create a governance system for the 28 state and community colleges, and it would require a supermajority vote by university boards of trustees and the Board of Governors when raising any student fees. Again, these are things that the Florida legislature should take care of themselves, and by law, this does not belong in our Florida Constitution.
What are your thoughts on the first half of that, the death benefits for first responders? I mean, that sounds wonderful, but again, it's...
I don't think it needs to be enshrined in the Constitution. There are ways to to recognize people. The legislature often does special acts that compensate families in situations like this, and they could
Are there any
easily do that if they wanted to.
any more specifics regarding the raising of college tuitions? I mean, in other states, they're talking about providing free education.
Right. This doesn't have anything to do with the tuition part. It's just about fees. I don't know why they chose that. But that's what they did. This commission passed up the chance to do some things I think that would be really helpful for our state. For example, one of the proposals that they passed on was providing standing for citizens to sue to protect the environment. There was a nursing home patient bill of rights, which would have mandated a safe, clean, comfortable, and home-like environment and forbid nursing homes from asking patients to waive their right to a jury trial if they were injured. That didn't see the light of day. Independence for judicial nomination commissions, the ones that appoint the judges, that was they've turned into political appointments instead of having somebody independent. So those are the kinds of things that really didn't get any traction, but fees for colleges did. So.
I'm looking at Ballotpedia, and they also say that on that same amendment is the college system amendment. Is that true or not, that they
Yes.
are going to incorporate?
Yes, there's a whole nother layer of regulation of our colleges.
I don't think we need to go into the details, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that they had the accurate information.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is there any coherent rationale for putting two such disparate subjects in one amendment?
No.
And it
why
reduces
would
their
anybody do that?
chances. I mean, if they really favored either one, they would think, well, I have a much better chance if I put them in separately, because the more things there are for people not to like, the longer the tail gets and the harder it gets to pass. So
Exactly.
it seems like they're defeating their own best interests at the same time. That's what I don't understand.
Well, I've read a couple of editorials that make the comment that they were really trying to just present a particular political agenda as part of this. And the second subject may just be something that they wanted to try to get enshrined into our Constitution for that reason alone. So I don't know why they lumped them together, maybe to see if, me, for example, I would love to see a ban on offshore drilling. And I'd love to see that as a standalone measure. But I don't think that we need to put something about vaping in the Constitution. All right? And so that's the next one. That is Amendment 9, and it would prohibit drilling for gas and oil in state coastal waters, which is 9 miles from the coast of Florida. But that's only for new drilling and wouldn't affect any of the leases that have already been granted. And we have some that are within that 9 miles. Coastal Petroleum, for example, has had leases since the 40s. And it would not prohibit them from being able to do anything because they have that contract right. But it would also ban vaping and the use of electronic cigarettes in workplaces. So, I'm not a fan of that, but I also don't believe it should be in the Constitution.
Why would they even consider that? I mean, do they have a constitutional prohibition against cigarettes and cigars in the workplace, or spitting, dipping snuff, or how about cooking with curry?
I kind of have a suspicion that the reason why these things are agglomerated together is to bring about a no vote. In other words, none of these things will pass because none of them will get the required, I believe it is 60%.
60%. Right?
Yes, so they're because somebody will object to.
That's why I say it's self-defeating unless you really wanted to put up 16 suggestions in the form of, or more in the form of 8 amendments that you hope none of them would actually pass. And I suppose if wasting everyone's time is their goal. They're succeeding very well in that respect.
Well,
Yeah.
I think their goal is probably more than just wasting our time.
Well,
They want something else from us.
see, but it's a mystery so far. I give them
Yeah.
credit for that.
So anyway, what else do we have?
The next
Who's
one,
next?
Amendment 10, it would require all charter county governments to have elected constitutional officers, including sheriffs. And it would lead to the legislature beginning its annual session in January in even-numbered years. And it would create an Office of Domestic Security and Counterterrorism in the Department of Law Enforcement. And it would revise the constitutional authority for the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Those are 4 or 5.
Let's just throw a whole handful of things into
It's a
one
stew,
and not have to have the wording of it reviewed by the Florida Supreme Court. Again, the first part of this one dealing with charter county governments, that's picking on Miami, who does not have an elected sheriff. And they have chosen home rule in Miami. They have their own county charter, and they like it that way. And this is the legislature reaching out to do what they like to do more and more frequently, which is to exert their influence from Tallahassee and preempt any kind of local.
But we've
Control.
heard they're all a bunch of liberals down in Miami, so
Never-
it's okay.
Nevertheless, it still sounds like the exact opposite of the conservative credo, as I understand it, which
Yes.
that we want to interfere as little as possible in people's daily lives, in their local government, in their government in general.
A little inconsistency is the mark of flexibility in terms of their political outlook. I'm sure that must be the
Yeah,
answer.
in less enlightened times, they call that hypocrisy.
Yeah, old lesson light. Yes.
All right, the next one is Amendment 11. And this one would remove the language that prohibits aliens ineligible for citizenship from owning property. It would remove some obsolete language that authorizes a high-speed rail system. We know why that became obsolete. It would revise language to make clear that the repeal of a criminal statute does not affect the prosecution of any crime committed before the repeal. Again, 3 things that don't have anything to do with each other, all in Amendment 11. So,
I don't understand the rationale behind number 3 in particular. A person is convicted of a crime, and 10 years later, that's not a crime anymore, and they object to absolving or pardoning or removing any stain from that person's record. Is there some reason they can't stand that?
yeah, apparently not. That
Maybe they're hoping to make them unemployable so they can get on the dole.
Bob Dole? Yeah.
Amendment 12 deals with ethics, and it would impose a 6-year lobbying ban on former state elected officials, state agencies, heads, and local elected officials. So for 6 years after they leave, supposedly they can't register to go lobby in Tallahassee. It would also create a new ethics standard that would prohibit public officials from obtaining a, quote, disproportionate benefit, close quote, from their actions while in office. I don't know what that means, but
Kind of sounds reasonable.
sounds like that's why they all run to me.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the guy, and he lost the job at some panhandle legislator who got a huge grant for the college up in Pensacola, and then he was supposed to get a job as soon as he retired from the legislature that paid him some exorbitant amount of money, and they were giving him all kinds of consulting fees, etc. I think that probably is what they might have been thinking about, is that specific example. But again, why put it in the Constitution? That's why we have a sheriff.
Yes, we can prosecute people when they do these things. So,
What are your thoughts on the lobbying ban, the 6-year lobbying ban? That sounds like a good idea on the surface. I mean,
On the surface, it does.
Revolving door.
But, that is probably just registered lobbyists. Who knows? And we all know that oftentimes people lobby without actually registering.
Sure, they still play golf.
Yeah. So, again, too many subjects, and I'm personally going to vote no on all these that have multiple subjects. The final one is the Greyhound Racing, Amendment 13. It would ban Greyhound racing at Florida tracks after December 31st, 2020. I don't know.
And why not horse racing?
All right.
Why is horse racing okay and dog racing is not?
It isn't so much that the racing itself is inhumane or different or hard on the
Yes.
dogs. It's the fact that when they retire them, they just turn them into dog food or
Right.
glue or whatever.
Not that I support racing of animals. Please don't think I do, because I don't. But I don't think it belongs in the Constitution.
Yeah, that we can start with that. It certainly does not belong in the Constitution.
However, we did miss one item. The school board term limits the state to operate the non-board established schools and the civic literacy
Oh, yeah.
amendment. The one that I find most egregious.
My apologies. Yeah, that's Amendment 8. It would impose an 8-year term limit on school board members. It would allow an alternative process for approving public schools, including charter schools, rather than by the local school boards.
But
Know where that's going?
the school board would have to pay for those schools.
Yeah. And it would establish a requirement for teaching civics again in public schools. So,
But
Something we would like to see.
they had a very strong civics program. Bob Graham was involved in that, and the legislature just defunded it last year. But now they want to put it back in, or the institution that was training the civics teachers. There's still, I believe, a still strong civics requirement in the statutes for education, requiring civics education. So I don't quite understand what they're getting at with the civics literacy amendment.
yeah, I think that's just the red herring in the whole thing. I think it's something that's popular, and
Yes.
people think, yeah, we should do that. Everybody can agree that we should know more about our government. But I think really the driver here is the charter schools,
Yes.
and setting up that
Yes.
separate approval process for that, because they are enamored with them in Tallahassee. All the money is coming, off the public school
Well,
budgets and going to the charters left and right. And
most of us here believe this is a move towards privatizing and getting rid of public schools completely, going to a complete voucher system so that religious schools can be funded,
And segregated
and
schools.
segregated schools.
And remember, that's probably the principal interest here. Even if they still retain public schools, they'll be in the poorest areas,
Yes.
and they'll be segregated.
De facto.
De facto, yes. And these charter schools, we've known lots of scandals that have happened. They have little accountability. They can shut down any time and leave the people just stranded, the students just stranded with no recourse but to go back to the public
and no
schools.
obligation to return any monies.
Right. And like I said earlier, even if the county doesn't approve the charter school, they still have to pay for it once the state approves it. And it comes out of the public school bill funds, public education funds, I should say.
right.
The term limits, I think it's up to the county to decide, the county voters to decide if the school board isn't doing their job and not elect someone. I mean, I know there are advantages when you're an incumbent, but I still don't in general approve of school board or school limit, term limits. Sorry.
Yeah, when I was growing up in Tampa, we had some school board members that served for a long, long time, and some of them were the best that we've ever had.
Right.
Cecile Essrig, Hugo Schmidt were both wonderful school board members, and to throw them out in 8 years would have been a disservice
That's
to
just when they
the
just-
county.
Just
You
when
know,
they get good at
if
their
somebody's
job.
not
Yeah.
doing a good job, vote them out. But if they're
Exactly.
doing a good job and they have the expertise, then let them stay.
Just when they get to know all the ins and outs of how to deal with everything and be able to be efficient in what they're doing, you're going to throw them out. But my major concern, of course, is the charter schools. I am definitely opposed to this amendment because it does force charter schools down the county's throat, whether they want it or not, and forces them to pay for it.
Scott is all over TV with his ads and for his Senate campaign talking about term
Yes.
limits and citing these polls that say every man, woman, and child in the world wants term limits. And so this may be part of that idea,
Well,
term
I-
limits. That
yeah.
this proposal's been around
I
for
think
a long
that's
time.
why it's in with the charter schools, is because it tends to be a very popular idea
Yeah.
among a lot of people, even though it's silly because you have term limits. It's called voting, and the charter school thing is kind of snuck in there in the middle, so people don't really realize what's happening here. That they're taking away control of local schools from the local community.
Let me
What-
ask Gary about another one. There was a Proposal 71, which exempts charter schools established by the state from supervision by local school boards. And, of course, that is currently the case, as I understand it. But it seems to me that by eliminating any testing or supervision, we can't get any feedback with which to evaluate the effectiveness of charter schools. Unlike the public schools, which have to produce definite results on a regular basis. So did this 71 proposal make it to the ballot, or it was incorporated into this?
I think that's what's
Amendments?
incorporated in is
It
that
is
separate
incorporated, yes. So
process for approving them.
that would undermine it significantly, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Among other things.
That and on the subject of term limits, all the studies show that since they've done this in Tallahassee, all it's done is increase the power of staff members,
Right.
the legislative staff, and lobbyists, because the people in the legislature, by the time they figure out what's going on, it's time for them to move on, and the others become the power brokers. So it's not all that it's cut out to be.
We already know that many lobbyists and many organizations write legislation and hand it to someone and say, here, this is what you need to pass. And that's very scary because, like you said, that by the time they figure out what's going on, they don't have time to figure out what's going on with the term limits. And I understand, because I lived in Tallahassee for a long time and worked for state government, that it does, it is appalling when somebody gets in and is very contrary to what the public needs and for the public interest and still manages to get reelected every time. But that's our responsibilities as a voter, is to make sure we're voting for those people who deserve to be in office. And that's part of the civics education, is people don't really understand how all of this seems to work.
Well, our responsibility as a voter is somewhat stunted by things like electronic voting machines that may or may not be getting hacked, by gerrymandering, which virtually cancels the votes.
Gerrymandering is, yes.
I mean, the majority of registered voters in Florida are Democratic, yet we have a Republican legislature, a Republican governor, Republican bus drivers, you name it.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I want to encourage people to do is to vote by mail, especially this year. This ballot is going to be multiple pages. And with all of these amendments and all of the other races that we have, our county commission races, for example, that are extremely important, are going to be at the very end of this long, long ballot. And if you vote by mail, you get 28 days to review that ballot, look things up, check it out, do your research, figure out who that person is that's on the ballot that you had never heard of, instead of either not voting for them or just skipping it. And there's in Hillsborough County, there's no postage required to mail your ballot in, and then you can go online and you can actually track it to make sure that it was received. And those are the first ballots that are counted. When the polls close and the results come in, and 2 minutes after 7 p.m., they put those initial returns up. Those are the vote by mail ballots. So I've been doing it for years. I think it's the best way to vote.
I agree.
And you won't be standing in line waiting for people, because this year it's going to take a lot of time for people to vote. So,
Well, Gary, are you suggesting that some few of our voters might wait until the last minute and read all the ballot material right there in the voting booth?
Election day is the last day to vote. Okay, we have a whole month to do it, and you really should take advantage of that.
One can hope.
Yes, Jim and I have been voting by mail for a number of years.
Yeah.
That's because we're lazy.
Yeah, exactly.
And all you lazy folks out there, it's a real
They
advantageous thing
send
to
it
do.
to you. You open it up. You have time to look at it, like you said.
Yeah.
You can Google everybody on the ballot and find out what they stand for. Because, some of these people I've never heard of, and I stay pretty tuned in to what's going on.
I know I've had experiences in the ballot booth where I've looked at a name and I recognized the name, and I couldn't remember whether it was because I
Yes.
liked him or hated him.
Yeah, exactly. And the older I get, the more common that
Yeah, right.
happens.
It's more frequent to hear about that.
So all they need to do to be able to vote by mail is go to the
Supervisor of Elections website. You can actually request that online. So either Pinellas County, Hillsborough County Supervisor of Elections, and you can do that. If you haven't voted in a while, you need to request that you get that vote by mail ballot. Again, they've made it more
Can you
difficult
register to
do.
vote online as well, or what do you have to do to register?
Yeah. I'm looking over my shoulder at my expert back here. My wife says yes. She recently went to a program where Craig Latimer, the Supervisor of Elections, spoke, and that's one of the things he said. So yes.
Great. And if you haven't voted in a long time, this is the time when you should.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you should take an interest in what's going on, because it's going to hurt you
Yeah.
if you don't.
Yeah. I have people that say, I don't do politics. Well, if you don't do politics, politics will do you.
That's right. There are people out there 24/7 thinking about how to do just that, as a matter of fact. So, well, it looks like it's that time again, and I hope that you'll join us again next week for another edition of the Atheist Forum. Along with Judy Atkins, Jim Peterson, and our special guest, Gary Gibbons, I'm Joe Reinhardt, reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
Forum.
Or ask
To
them.
learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.